Hey, this is Ed Robertson, and this is the Mountain and Prairie podcast, where I introduce you to some of the innovative and creative individuals who are helping to shape the future of the American West. I meet most of these people through my work in ranch brokerage and land conservation, or through my hobbies and interests that revolve around spending time in the mountains. My guests include ranchers, writers, entrepreneurs, conservationists, athletes, artists, pretty much anyone who's doing important work and has an interesting story to tell. My guest today is Camrin Dengel. Camrin is a professional lifestyle photographer who lives and works on the quiet side of the Teton Range in Teton Valley, Idaho. Her work focuses on a broad range of subjects with a special emphasis on sustainable agriculture, hunting, fishing, and life in and around her community. In her work and play, Camrin is a devoted proponent of slow living, and she strives to approach her life and profession in a manner that's intentional, simple, meaningful, and positive. Growing up in Valdez, Alaska gave Camrin a unique perspective and toughness, she calls it stubbornness, that has allowed her to pursue a passion for art full-time while staying true to her ideals and a slow living lifestyle. She entered college on a running scholarship with the intention of becoming an engineer, but decided midway through that art and photography were her true calling. After graduation, she moved straight to Idaho, where she's built a life and business centered around documenting the people and places that make Teton Valley such a special place to live. I've spent a lot of time in Teton Valley and can honestly say that Camrin's work captures the landscape and lifestyle of the valley more authentically than any artist I've ever seen. She's obviously a talented photographer, but she's also a super interesting person who's managed to sidestep a good deal of the busyness and distractions that dominate our present-day lives. In our conversation, we discuss her career trajectory, and we also discuss her love for the community of Teton Valley. We dig deep into the idea of slow living, and she offers some thoughts on ways that people can adopt a slower, more intentional lifestyle. As usual, we discuss favorite books, documentaries, and some of the challenges and opportunities facing the American West. This was a really fun episode full of lots of great info. Be sure to check out the episode notes on the webpage for links to everything we discuss. Hope you enjoy. Well, the first question I've been asking people when I start these interviews is when you meet somebody for the first time and they ask you that question that people love to ask, which is, what do you do? How do you answer that?
Well, it's taken me a while to be able to feel comfortable saying I'm a photographer.
Yeah.
I'm finally, I feel pretty comfortable telling people I'm a photographer, but I definitely struggle with explaining what kind of photography I do, just because a lot of people make the assumption that it's more of a traditional path with portraits and weddings and that sort of thing. So that's what they kind of usually think of when I say I'm a photographer. But just kind of explaining that I shoot lifestyle and with the purpose of advertising or branding or sometimes stock. And that's, been kind of hard to figure out, because I also really focus on slow living and not everyone knows what that means. And so it's definitely a conversation starter.
That's perfect. And that's what I'm looking for, a good conversation. So, so as far as I want to talk about the slow living in detail, and I want to talk about photography in detail. And so just as far as the photography goes, can you give an example of a project you've worked on that you found to be pretty interesting that kind of is a good illustration of all the different types of photography that you do?
Yeah, I recently did a project for Filson, and that was one of their Filson life stories, which is kind of like their blog. And I wrote a little short article, and it was kind of more of a photo essay of my life here in Teton Valley. With my guy and with my dog and our truck and kind of just what we do, hunting and fishing and just what it looks like to live out west for me at least. And so that was pretty fun because it's very dear to my heart. And so and it's my everyday. And so it was fun to come up with little scenes that I wanted to include that I would make sure that we get out and shoot. And that just really illustrated living out west and what that's like here for me in Teton Valley.
Yeah, and that's how I found you. I subscribe to all Filson's stuff, and I own some of their gear, and I think it's a great company. And I saw their when they were featuring some of your work. And I've spent a ton of time in Teton Valley myself, and I thought you captured it perfectly. I couldn't believe it because it's, I'm in the ranch business, and I used to have to take photos of ranches trying to capture the scene over there. And I can never even come close to how well you do it. So that's initially how I found out about you. Can you talk a little bit about Teton Valley for people who don't know anything about it? I think everybody who loves the West knows about Jackson Hole on the other side of the mountains, but can you just talk a little bit about Teton Valley and why you love it so much?
Well, Teton Valley is the quieter side of the Tetons. It's definitely, there's not as much going on. It's not as steezy, and it's kind of a combination of farm meets ski town, farm town meets ski town. And because there are a lot of people that have lived out here for as long as it takes to have, your name on the street signs. And there are people who have moved out here to ski and to play in the mountains around here. So it's kind of a mixed bag of the type of people that live here. And we have the Tetons on one side of the valley and the Big Hole Mountains on the other. And the Teton River kind of runs a little bit through the middle. And so it's a really beautiful landscape with it being flat and open, surrounded by these really big mountains. And there's a lot of people who live here to play in them, and there's a lot of people who make a living working in the valley, farming and ranching.
Yeah, that's one of the things I think I find so interesting about Teton Valley is that the people there are making a living there, and they're working there, whether it's in agriculture or even with the ski resort there at Grand Targhee. And it's you don't find that, especially in Colorado where I live, you just don't find kind of towns that are that close to ski resorts where there's actual agriculture and kind of a real world that's connected to the land. Most of it is just kind of invented towns. Yeah. So I think that's a really special place. How did you end up in Teton Valley?
Well, I moved out here right after college.
Okay.
And I wanted to work with a photographer. And I, at the time, was very interested in the outdoor adventure photography industry. And so I flipped through a Patagonia catalog and pretty much wrote every photographer that had their name printed on one of the pages. And Gabe Rogel was one of the photographers that responded and was like, yeah, come work with me. And I'd been out to Jackson once before. My best friend from college grew up there. And so I knew I liked the area. I didn't know much about Driggs. I knew Jackson. But I moved out here kind of blind to what Teton Valley was. And I worked with Gabe for a little while. And I just haven't left. I've just really fallen in love with Driggs and Victor and Teutonia in this area.
And so you started out focused on adventure. How did you kind of transition into your current focus?
Well, I think working for Gabe and even some of the other photographers around here, connecting with them, I've realized, not right away, but fairly quickly, that that wasn't a path I really enjoyed that much. It's pretty fast paced. Mm-hmm. And I think I got to experience more of the slow living side of things, the farms and the people out here that are exploring at a little bit of a, less fast pace. And that I just kind of slowly shifted. And it's definitely a surprise to me. I didn't really think that was going to happen, but it's been a really great shift for me and who I have become. And so I've been really happy with it, but I definitely learned what I didn't want to be gone all the time. I didn't want to be traveling the world. I'm a little bit of a homebody, and it's fun to have a home and to stick around and get to explore this place. And so, yeah, that's kind of how it started to shift for me.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you've mentioned slow living a few times. How do you define that?
Well, I think slow living is it's really a reaction to this fast living that we live every day with social media and just be the expectations that our society has created for, us to really feel like we've success,
Mm-hmm.
and so slow living to me is just taking a slower look at life and experiencing, kind of finding the beauty in more of your everyday. And yeah, that's kind of.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, in your quest to kind of slow things down, have you figured out a way to do that? That's enjoyable versus just kind of fighting against the system. Because I know that if I try to block out, social media or advertising or whatever, but my wife always makes fun of me because it's definitely a battle, and it's it's me, kind of putting up a fight against it. Like the other night, we were watching something on TV, and the ads came on, and I literally like shifted my body so that I couldn't see the ads because I don't like ads. And,
Yeah.
it seemed like that's kind of a waste of energy, really fighting it that hard. So how do you enjoy the slow living without it being a battle?
Well, I think that I've started to tell myself that I don't have to do it all,
Mm-hmm.
and have just taken a step back from that. I really just do what's fun and what feels right, and so when I've been approached by people to do kind of, the influencer advertising kind of thing on Instagram or wherever, like that kind of just makes my skin crawl a little bit because it feels so contrived. And so I think I just have been I've tried to stay true to what feels right to me. Like, and basically just being really honest with myself, like, keeping everything honest. And so I guess, Instagram and Facebook, sometimes that's fun. And when it starts to feel more like work and not like sharing my work,
Mm-hmm.
then I kind of let myself, it's okay if it slips by the wayside a little bit. It's not really the most important thing in the world. I mean, it's definitely a great tool as a business person. And it's helped me reach a wider audience, and it's fun to get feedback from people all over the world. And so that's the way I look at it, is just keeping it fun.
Yeah, and I would imagine being intentional about it too is
Yeah.
important versus just being reactive. Whenever because with the number of followers you have and the kind of the people that admire your work, I would imagine if you reacted to every little buzz on your phone, you'd be doing it all day long, versus being intentional about it.
Yeah, and I think I've been lucky with this sort of attention that I have gotten. It's all been really positive for the most part. But when you do start to reach a larger audience, sometimes you get negative stuff, and that, I'm a sensitive person, and that can kind of bring you down. But being able to just look at it, everyone's entitled to their own perspective, and, just keeping my work as honest as possible has been a good approach for me, because at least I feel good about it.
Yeah, that's right. And in the end, whenever anybody criticizes me on anything, it's not for them. At work is when you're doing creative work, it's not for everybody. And if it is for everybody, it's probably not really creative. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a great attitude. I wish I could adopt more of that. Do you have any advice for people who'd like to try to adopt a kind of a slower lifestyle, whether they're a creator or an artist, or even just somebody with a somewhat normal job but feels overwhelmed by all the technology? Do you have any thoughts on or any advice that you could give to those kind of people?
Yeah, I would say just begin shedding the things that don't make you feel good. If it's not bringing you happiness, like obviously there are things that we all have to do in life, but when it comes to these voluntary things, if it doesn't bring you happiness, then what's the point? You're supposed to be getting joy out of these things. And my approach with the fast pacedness is I only do what feels good and what feels right. And I've eliminated a lot of things that have fallen into that realm just because I'm like, I don't really need that. So I would say just kind of start picking away at some of those things that you don't need and focus on the things that do feel really good.
I think that's great advice. So I'd love to know more about your personal background. I know a little bit from stalking online, which is, I'm sure that's kind of weird when I sent you all the questions and I knew like where you grew up. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Valdez, Alaska.
And how were your parents, did your parents grow up there, or how did your parents end up there?
No, they met in Montana.
Okay.
And they were kind of both the adventurers out of their family, and they headed to Alaska. And I believe it was my mom that instigated that move, and my dad was like, sure. And so they went up there and they lived all over Alaska, and ended up settling in Valdez. Mm-hmm. And yeah, me and my brother both grew up there. My brother lived in Cordova, Alaska for a little while, but for the most part, Valdez has been home for a long time.
So when you look back on your youth in Alaska and kind of compare it to your life now in the lower 48, are there any parts of life when growing up in Alaska that at the time it seemed normal, and now looking back, you think, wow, that was extremely unique, or that was extremely weird, or that was extremely cool? Because I've spent some time in Alaska, and it seems to almost be its own country with its own cultures, and it's such a unique place. Are there any things that stand out in your mind as being completely unique that you didn't realize at the time?
Well, I think everything in Alaska is just a little bit harder. Like getting food is harder. Like, there's one road in and out of Valdez, and there's one grocery store. And one thing that I remember feeling like was really normal was how much we traveled, how much we drove. Mm-hmm. It was 5.5 hours to Anchorage from Alaska. And in high school, we did that every weekend for sport trips and stuff. And down here, I feel like it's a big deal for kids to drive like 2 hours to the next town for a game or a race or something like that. And we drove everywhere to go. It's such a big state that if you want to get anywhere, it's, a lot of car time or, in the airplane or on a boat or something like that. And so the accessibility is way easier in the valley, and that's something that I've really loved. Decided that is nice to be able to have these trails and everything be very accessible. And whereas Alaska, everything's bigger and vaster and just takes a little bit more effort.
Yeah, the scale of things in Alaska is hard to comprehend, especially if you've first spent time in the American, the American West and the lower 48, and then you go up there and you see some mountains in the distance and you think you have an idea of how big they are. And then you see a plane fly by or something, gives you perspective. And all of a sudden you realize how damn big those mountains are. I mean, it's just the valleys are bigger, the mountains are bigger, the wildlife's bigger. That place is it's amazing. I'm sure that was a unique childhood. Are there any things you can think back on of ways that it kind of shaped your outlook and your perspective that carry over today?
Yeah, I think that it really added to my stubbornness. I don't tend to give up on things very easy. And I remember going to college and just some of the adventures I had with friends there. I think maybe I would go a little bit overboard. People are like, well, I'm not going to do that. And it's like, well, but we can do it, and my friend I remember her being like, yeah, but that's not the point. Like, we don't need to do it. I think like growing up in Alaska, everything being just a little bit harder, you just kind of get used to like, well, you just kind of muscle through it or, figure out a way to make it work. And, just kind of.
Just tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess that's another way to put it. But yeah, I think of it as just being a little bit hard-headed when you approach things.
I think that's important in any walk of life, but I think when you're making a living in professional photography, it's probably very important. It's such a competitive field. That's all. I think everybody could use a little more toughness and stubbornness. So where did you go to college? Did you stay up there?
I went to college at Humboldt State University in Arcata, California, in the Redwoods.
Yeah. How'd you decide on that?
Well, I wanted to go into environmental engineering, and they had a really great program there. And I got a running scholarship there, and things just kind of worked out. I wanted to get out of Alaska for sure. I needed to kind of see something different. And I really liked Arcata in that area. I've
never been there, but I've heard it's just unreal.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's a very different kind of beauty. It's much less rugged, and the redwoods are right there, and so is the coast. And it's a really pretty part of California.
So you were running cross country or track or both?
Cross country. Yep.
That's great, man. That's I do a lot of running now, but looking back when I was 16 or 17, it's talking about toughness. I just wasn't tough enough to do that, to push myself that hard. So you went there with the intention of being an engineer, and you came out an artist. That's about the two most opposite ends of the spectrums. Can you talk about how that happened?
Well, I ended up graduating with a science degree in natural resources. Okay. So I definitely made a shift internally as an artist, and I finished out my degree in the science program. And with my degree in natural resources, it kind of allowed for me to be able to lighten up on my course load. And I was able to take some of the art classes, some of the photography classes in the dark room and digital. And I pretty much knew when I graduated that I wasn't going to use that degree, but I've always been really interested in the environment. And I think I just needed to take a step back from it being, look at it more big picture environmentally versus kind of getting down to the math. And I think that my brain wasn't really wired to be an engineer. So I made that shift pretty much right away.
Yeah. And so when you mentioned that you started reaching out to photographers, was that at the end of your college career or soon thereafter?
Yeah, that was my senior year. I was pretty much sure that I wanted to pursue photography and see where it would take me, see if I could make it work. And yeah, senior year, I was trying to see where I could end up next and who I could learn from.
Sure. And I saw in some article that had been written about you that you spent some time during college working with the Alaska Marine Conservation Council, and that may have played a role in your shift to art versus engineering. Can you talk a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, that was really my first time that I had a mission with my photography. And so I got to travel around Alaska and photograph the fishing industry. And there was a purpose there. And I was still doing some work that fell into that kind of engineering category. I was working on a project that we called greening the fishing industry, looking at different ways to make it a little bit more environmentally friendly with different adaptations to fishing boats and stuff. But what I really enjoyed was getting out to the villages and taking photos of the fishing community and that lifestyle. And that really sparked my interest in figuring out how to make it work as a profession. Got it.
And so when you look at those fishermen, and then you look at some of the ranchers and farmers there in Teton Valley, they're both trying to make a living off of the earth. Yeah. Or do you see any similarities between the two? I'm not at all familiar with the salmon professional fishermen or commercial fishermen. So is there any overlap there as far as their outlook or their respect for the land, respect for natural resources?
I mean, they all have respect for natural resources, I would say, or the people that I have encountered with it, because they are trying to make a living off the land, and also very hardworking people that are out there in the elements. And, there's risk involved as well in both. Like it could be a good season or it could not.
Oh yeah. There's so much out of their control. I mean, 75% of it is completely out of their control.
Yeah. But I definitely, I really enjoy photographing people that work hard and work with their hands. And so both of those are really fun to get to be involved with projects that involved fishermen or ranchers or farmers or people that are working hard.
Yeah, I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I feel like ranchers and sometimes commercial fishermen get a bad rap because people think, producing meat or catching fish is bad for the environment. And I think that may be the case when you're talking about these corporate, massive organizations that do it. But, when you're talking about small ranching families or families of commercial fishermen, they have no choice but to make it sustainable, because if it's not, they don't make any money and their family, goes broke.
Exactly.
And so I think they're more of they're more conservationist than anybody. At least that's my opinion.
I would agree with that, especially in these, smaller communities where that's their livelihood and it's not a big corporate company. It's these family-owned businesses. They definitely have an understanding of what their role is in that world.
Yeah, for generations. That's what's interesting. They do it for generation after generation. So I do a lot of work in land conservation, and it's a personal and professional interest of mine. But in talking with people on this podcast and just people in general, I've found out that the word conservation can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And so I'm always interested to ask people like you, how do you define conservation, or how do you think about conservation? Because you've got a really unique perspective on it.
Well, I just really see it simply as sustainability, and conserving to be able to have it continue, and not any more than that, but just, taking it into very simple terms. It's keeping things sustainable.
Yeah, I think it's a good way of putting it. And it also lets you, reminds you how complicated it is at the same time. So I've seen on your social media and your work with Filson that you are a big, you enjoy fishing and hunting. And can you talk a little bit just about your interest in those sports and kind of what they mean to you, both for fun and from kind of a slow living standpoint?
Yeah. Well, they're both really things that I started doing when I moved out here. I had never fly fished before, but that definitely falls into the slow living category for me, because it's not about anything else but the moment and being in touch with the land. And from the hunting perspective, I mean, I definitely approach it as a way to get out in nature and connect, but also as I take it very seriously when it comes to killing an animal. And, it being with the purpose of putting food on the table and being able to be in touch with the meat that I eat, and understanding kind of what that connection is like. And so, yeah, both of them I feel like are definitely ways for me to slow down, and they fit right in with the slow lifestyle that I'm trying to live.
Do you have a favorite fishing spot there in Teton Valley?
Yeah, I do. My boyfriend would kill me if
I. Yeah, you don't have to give a specific spot, but maybe with a 20-mile radius.
Well, I love fishing just in the valley. Like there's a lot of different little spots that you can go. Like just down the road, and you know, hop in the truck, and it's just a couple miles from home. And so those are always fun evenings for me, and versus a big day where you put the boat on and you know, you could just go out down to the river in the evening, fish for a couple hours and catch what you catch.
Yeah, that's what I like. I used to go to the Hoback down, just leave town in Jackson and go down there after work in the summer. God, it's the best. There's nowhere better than where you live for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a good spot for, and the nice thing is that you can drive to a hole and you may see a few people. You drive to the next one, there's not going to be anybody there, so you can have it all to yourself, you know, depending on what time of year it is.
Have you gotten a elk or a deer this hunting season?
You know, I have not tried my hand in big game hunting yet. Mm-hmm. I have really just been bird hunting. It's been my introduction. But my boyfriend did shoot a really nice bull during bow season.
Oh, wow.
So we filled the freezer and almost didn't have enough room for it. But that was pretty exciting. And he's been deer hunting as well. Yet to get a deer. But I was thinking that I was going to try to shoot a cow elk this fall, but I think that I'm going to wait until next year and give that a try. Maybe we'll have 2 elk in the freezer.
Yeah, you need a pretty big freezer for that.
Yeah.
So when you're looking back, you know, you've built this life and this career for yourself there in Teton Valley, doing what you want to do at the pace you want to do it. But it's it's a relatively, it's outside the norm of, I would imagine, what most of your classmates in college were doing. It definitely is the path, less traveled. So when you're thinking about that, you know, what gave you the confidence to pursue that path versus, you know, just getting a job like everybody else seems to do? I mean, do you credit your parents, your upbringing? What do you think kind of gave you that confidence to go out and take a chance doing what you want to do?
I think I would credit my parents. You know, I don't think that they were expecting this path, but they definitely have encouraged me to go after what I want. And they've given me a lot of confidence in believing that I can do anything I do want to do. And so when I left for college, one of the stipulations was that they really were adamant about me finishing my degree.
Sure.
And at least having that as a fallback. But for the most part, yeah, they were really supportive. And I think that without that base, I think it would have been a lot harder to get up the confidence to go and try something really out of the box.
Do you have any role models or mentors, and they could be, you know, like your parents, people you know, or historical figures, people you've read about, that you've never met, alive or dead? You know, are there any people that you look at them as a great role model as to how to live a meaningful life?
Yeah. You know, Forrest Woodward, who is a photographer and was also, an instructor of mine when I went to school in Missoula for a few weeks with the Rocky Mountain School of Photography. Mm-hmm. He has definitely been an inspiration to me as a photographer who shoots what he wants to shoot and has a very distinct style and is definitely a free spirit and is very honest with his work. And so he's someone who I look up to a lot. In the photography world. And I also have another instructor that was at RMSP, and his name's Mike Tittle, and he's also a photographer, but he does a lot more of the commercial side of things. But he has really been an inspiration for me as far as the business side of things. He's very, very well versed in the photography business, and you know, has really been there, you know, guided me a lot in post RMSP. And so I'm really grateful for having both of those guys be so willing to give me advice and tell me what they think.
Yeah, that seems like a perfect combo. You got one on the, that's on the extreme artist end, and then one that is on more of the business end. And if you can combine the best of both of those, you're in good shape, as you are. If you weren't an artist, like if you hadn't have picked this up and pursued it as hard as you have, are there any other career paths you could see yourself following?
Yeah, there's a lot actually. I think that I would have loved to have tried my hand as a farmer.
Mm-hmm.
And my good friend in town, who is a farmer, she says it's not too late. I could still see if that was in my future. But I also think that I would really have loved to have been some kind of maker, an artist that was creating, functional pieces of clothing, or, a potter, or someone that was working with my hands. I think that would be something that I would really enjoy. And I love curating things, and having a very curated brand, I think, would be a really fun part of that. But yeah, or working with animals, like, being a horse packer, or all the things that I really love to photograph. I'm like, wow, this would be really fun to do. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it sounds like given where you live and the people that you interact with, all those are options if you want them. That's really cool. So I would imagine that I know that there are tons of people who look at your work and hear about your life and think, I want something like that. Is there any advice that you give to aspiring photographers or aspiring artists of any kind? Maybe say somebody who's a junior in college that mm-hmm. is trying to plan out or look ahead as to what they want their life to look like. What kind of advice would you give for somebody like that?
I would say I have a couple thoughts. One thing would be, just don't wait for the perfect scenario. Like mm-hmm. It's never gonna line up perfectly.
That's a great piece of advice.
You kind of have to just go for it. And the other one, as far as like other photographers, I get a lot of people that reach out to me and they want to know what kind of gear I'm using. What camera body do you use? What's your lens lineup? And I'm a very non-technical person. And so I would just say, don't get so hung up on the gear. I mean, people take amazing photos with their iPhones. It's really much more about the content. And if you are creating images that you're really passionate about and excited about, then the gear, like, certainly to some extent, a nice camera will go pretty far. But I'm not afraid to admit that, like, I don't know all of the functions on my, the menu in my camera. It's kind of
awesome.
What I like to use, and it works for me. And sometimes I play around and experiment, but, the gear is less important to me. It's really more about what's in front of the camera.
I think that's great advice. I think gear in general, no matter what you're talking about, can be an excuse. I think it's obviously in artistic endeavors, it is. And I think even in sports, it is, even as something as simple as running, people get all hung up on the specifics of their shoes or some heart rate monitor, watch they need, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. And in the end, you just need to go running. And in your line of work, you just need to go take photos and get experience.
Yeah. Keep shooting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Even with this podcast, I just bought the cheapest microphone they had on Amazon, and here we go.
Yeah.
And then I've got one more question about photography that's kind of a self-serving question, but I take a lot of photos for my work. And so if there's one piece of advice you could give me, and I would say mine's less artistic and more the point of it is to showcase really cool, big ranches all over the West. And so is there a simple piece of advice you would give, a not so good photographer like me?
Well, I would say whatever stands out to you as the really neat part of what you want to showcase. Mm-hmm. Like, shoot what you love, shoot what gets you really excited. Like, what are you honing in on that you see that maybe someone else, when they view it, that's not going to stand out to them.
Yep.
Maybe find that little sparkle that stands out to you and focus on that and try to showcase that in an image. Cause I think that can go a long ways.
Yeah. I think that's a really good suggestion. I've got a few questions that I've been asking everybody, that I have on the podcast, and I've gotten some really interesting answers. So I'd love to get your thoughts. They're fairly quick questions, but you don't need to give quick answers.
Okay.
The first one is, do you have any favorite books that you recommend to people? And they can be about the American West or about any subject, just any books that have been meaningful to you.
I'm in the middle of reading one right now that I really like, and it's called Turn Here, Sweet Corn. And it's not necessarily about the West. It's about the organic farming movement. Mm-hmm. And it's really about this woman's experience, and her relationships with different people and with the land, with the animals and her customers. And it's a really, really cool book that I was really surprised at how much of a page turner it was. But it's a really good one that I would recommend.
Cool. Yeah, I've never heard of that. So that's exactly why I ask. It kind of along the same lines, are there any resources, whether blogs or other books on the idea of slow living that you think other people who are interested in the subject should check out?
Slow living. Well, there's another woman that I follow along with, and she's a photographer, and her name is Jillian, and her brand is called, you'd find her under The Noisy Plume. Mm-hmm. She has a blog, and she has an Instagram with 40,000 followers. And I think that she does a really good job of showcasing slow living as well. And it's in a different way, but she lives in Idaho as well. And she's a hunter and a fly fisher. And she is in touch with the food that she eats. And she's also an artist as a metalsmith. But I find a lot of inspiration from her. Sometimes some of the things that she showcases, like, they give me a little bit of a pick-me-up. And she showcases things in a little different way.
That's perfect. And I'll have links to all of these books and like her Instagram and all that. I'll have that on the webpage so people can easily access it. Are there any documentaries that you particularly enjoy?
Yeah, I watched one recently on Netflix called Unbranded.
Oh yeah, I interviewed the guy, Ben Masters. Yeah, I interviewed him maybe a few months back.
Oh, I'll have to go back and listen to it. I thought that was such a cool documentary. Focusing on their trip with wild Mustangs that they had adopted, and it was fun, really fun, and had a really good message. Yeah,
he's a cool guy, and the fact that he was able to pull that off just a few years out of college, I thought that was amazing. And he's doing a ton of really, really important work with the BLM's Wild Mustang program. And I agree with you. That's one of the best documentaries I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, I really liked it.
I saw another one, and I can't remember the name right now, but it's just like a 25-minute deal. But Patagonia produced it. I think it's called maybe Unbroken Ground or Common Ground, but it's about sustainable agriculture. Uh-huh. And they go up and they follow around some salmon fishermen in Alaska, and they follow a buffalo rancher in South Dakota. I'll put links to it, and I'll email you the link because you'd really enjoy it because it kind of hits on everything that you have an interest and experience in.
Mm-hmm. I think I saw a trailer on that, but I didn't see the full thing.
Yeah, it's pretty. It's like 25 minutes. So it's really good. Is there any activity you enjoy? I know you like to fish, hunt. Obviously photography. Spend time outside. Are there any activities you do that would be surprising to people listening to this?
Yeah. I'm really into minimalism, mm-hmm. and like, this is kind of a funny one, but I love getting rid of stuff. And you know that feeling when you're on a backpacking trip and all you have is what you need?
Yes.
I'm always kind of like trying to have that feeling in my everyday. And so I love just kind of streamlining my home, my closet, my life in general. And so, like it feels so good to kind of just eliminate things from your life that are not serving any purpose or don't bring you joy, you know, or don't make you feel fantastic. And so, yeah, like, just kind of taking a box to the thrift store or, you know, moving things out that are not bringing you joy, or, you know, that's something that maybe would be surprising, but is something that I really like to do.
That's awesome. I just did that a few weeks ago, and I went, my wife and daughter were gone for the weekend, and I went nuts, and I either threw out or took to the Salvation Army. It seemed like about 150 pounds of stuff, and I've never felt so great. We don't even have a lot of stuff. I don't even know where the stuff came from, but it'll pile up. I think I think everybody should do more of that.
You have to stay on top of it. But
you really do. I think my wife and I lived in Central America for a year, and that really kind of rebooted my thoughts on the amount of junk you need. Because it was probably the most simple time of my life. And it was also one of the most rewarding, because you're not just overrun with all this crap.
Yeah. It's amazing, like how much junk we feel like we need as Americans.
Yeah, it's insane. Well, I could talk about it for hours, and I'd probably get all fired up about it. But, so growing up in Alaska, living in Teton Valley, spending so much time outdoors, is there a certain memory you have of the craziest thing that's ever happened to you outdoors? And it can be funny or scary or powerful. When you think about the craziest thing that's ever happened to you, what comes to mind?
This was a really hard one. I don't know that I have a good answer for that. I feel like a lot of people, as knowing that I'm Alaskan, people are like, "What's your craziest bear story?" And I'm like, I really haven't had like a crazy experience. I've had friends that have, but I personally, I haven't really had anything that to me stood out as nuts, but
I bet
I want to come up with something, because I've done some really fun things, and I definitely have pushed the limits at times, but I might have to come back to that one, because I think that I might have something I'd want to share. But
and I think your perspective is probably skewed too. Growing up in Alaska, what you think is boring or normal, most people would think is insane. At least that's when the times I've spent in Alaska, I've seen stuff and I've thought that's one of the craziest things I've ever seen, and it seems to be relatively normal out there.
Yeah.
What is your favorite location in the West or in the world? And it could be anything, like a certain mountain, a certain stretch of river, a town, just when you think of your favorite place in the West, what comes to mind?
One of my favorite places is McCarthy, Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this little place in the middle of nowhere, and it's a little town where there's a parking lot and you have to walk across the bridge to get to town. And it's, not made up of much, but the Kennecott copper mine is there. It's totally non-functioning. And there's the Root Glacier, and there's a guiding outfit, and it's just there's all these little red buildings that are broken down, and it's out there. And I had some good times there, just, open mic nights, or just passing through. Like it's a ways out of your way, but I've been there a couple times, and it stands out as one of my favorite places.
This wasn't on the list I sent you, but speaking of Alaska, if somebody was going on a vacation up there and they didn't want to do the normal tourist stuff, is there anywhere or any particular places you would recommend that people visit that would be really cool, but not overrun with the fanny pack crew that likes to on the tourist circuit?
Yeah. a couple summers I worked for a kayak guiding outfit out of Valdez, and we'd take people out into Prince William Sound
Mm-hmm.
and see kayaks, and you could pick whatever kind of adventure you wanted out there. But there's a lot of different cabins that you can kayak to, and you can just follow the shore out in Prince William Sound and kind of hop from glacier to glacier even. And that is just, it stands out to me as one of the more beautiful places in Alaska. And out on the ocean, you're not, if you get out far enough in Prince William Sound, you're not going to see anyone. And you'll see a lot of wildlife. And definitely, you don't have to be super experienced or, it's not particularly hard to see kayak, but it's a really cool way to see a part of Alaska that I think is one of the cooler pieces.
Yeah, that's a very good idea. And this is one other question I had that I forgot to ask, but I saw on your Facebook page that it looks like you had done the Mount Marathon when you were growing up in Alaska. Is that correct?
Yeah, my family did that race every 4th of July.
Can you talk about that race and give people an idea? Because that's really hardcore.
It is kind of hardcore. That might be one of those things
that's crazy.
Thinking is normal. Yeah.
That's really crazy. I train with some guys around here who do that, who go up to Alaska every year and do it. And I mean, when you watch the videos of that, it is unbelievable.
Yeah. There's the required safety meeting before if you're a first time runner, and people, they auction off place. It's quite hard to get into, nowadays, and people that are not from Alaska or, want to run it as well. But they, I've been there when they've auctioned off like a single spot in a race for over $1,000.
Oh, wow. So give a quick overview of the race for people who aren't familiar with it.
So it starts in the town of Seward, and you run up towards Mount Marathon. And the beginning of the race, there's many different routes that you can take at the beginning, and then it all piles into pretty much a single file line. And you could be as gutsy as you want. Getting up that first part of the mountain, there's kind of a rock wall, or there's a little trail through these mangled roots. And people fly. And I mean, Olympian Keegan Randall, she ran it and didn't even win it, like certain years, so like people in Seward or all over Alaska, they train on Mount Marathon all year. And it's usually either like super hot or raining, or there's still snow. And I remember the first year I ran it in the adult category, because as a youth, you run it until you turn 18, you run half of the mountain. So you go and you turn around a stake in the ground that people are counting your numbers. And so the first year I ran it as an adult, there were snow patches on the upper half of the mountain. And my mom, who also ran the race, her advice to me was you got to find two big rocks, and then you get on the snow and you ride kind of your foot down, but you can't let your butt touch the snow or you'll get these big raspberries.
Yeah.
And so the rocks are to help you when you reach the bottom of the snow to not cause you to just fly into the shale.
Oh, so it's like a ice axe, like to self-arrest.
Break. So you dig those in, and that can help you slow down, because otherwise you just like fly right down. But yeah, pretty cool race. And then, when you get back to that bottom spot, there's people who have like, a three-step process to like get down the gully. It's pretty much like rock climbing. Or, there's slower routes that you don't have to take, but, then you run back to the finish line, you hit the cement, and your legs feel like rubber and they're jelly or something like that. And usually if you're not bleeding, people probably don't think you went as fast as you should. So yeah, it's, you're just caked in mud, and you tape your socks to your shoes so you don't get all those rocks into the inside of your shoes. And there's just a huge audience lining the street cheering for people coming down. It's a big event. There's vendors. It's a big 4th of July party. And yeah, it's a pretty cool event.
That's really cool. And that proves that your perspective is skewed if you just kind of forgot about that. So last question, as far as these rapid fire questions, what do you think is the biggest challenge and or opportunity facing the American West today?
This one was hard for me as well, because I feel like there's a couple different answers. I think I would probably say our challenge with unsustainable agriculture, and figuring out a way to keep that sustainable and do it in a way that doesn't rip the land from its nutrients, and managing that, I would think, would be it's something we face in Teton Valley with the different types of farmers, the organic farmers versus some of the bigger corporate farms. And there's kind of, there's different ways to look at that. To me, that stands out as a problem that at some point there's going to need to be a dialogue about, kind of on a bigger level than it is currently.
Yeah, I think that's 100% true. And I think I think that problem it faces everybody right outside your front door there, but it also is a global issue as well. I just read a book called The End of Plenty, and it's about the kind of coming global food crisis. And it's really, it starts out really scary with all of the stuff that's wrong, but then the author gives kind of some case studies of different people, both fishing and ranching and farming, that are doing it the right way, and that kind of give hope to it all. And so that's a really good book. I enjoyed that. This guy who wrote it's a National Geographic reporter. And so it's eye-opening, even for somebody like me who kind of understands the stuff. So next to the last question, if you could make a request of the people listening to this podcast, what would it be? And the people that listen to this are just, in general, people who love the American West, whether that's from an artistic standpoint or athletic standpoint, or, ranching, professional standpoint, just people that have an interest in the American West.
I would say, I would urge people to really try the living slow thing. And I think it fits really well into, it blends really well with people who love the American West and all that it stands for. And I think as we get farther and farther down the road, all of these distractions that kind of urge us to live faster, they're just going to keep becoming greater. And so to kind of bring that perspective into your life and just try to eliminate some of those things that don't feel like they're adding to your life, and just be able to focus on the things that really do, whether that's getting outside and exploring, or being connected to your food, or just connecting with the earth in some way.
Yeah, I agree with all that. So how can people connect with you? I know you've got a great Instagram, you've got a great webpage. What's the best way for people to find out more?
Well, I have a website, and that kind of serves as my portfolio, but my Instagram is really more of like my day-to-day things that I'm doing and excited about. And I try to keep it pretty fun and honest, and just connect people to the projects that I'm working on, or just things that are happening in my life. So my Instagram handle is just Camrin Dengel, and that's a good place to follow along and connect and reach out and tell me what you think, or share something that you've done, or just kind of keep in touch.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was really, really interesting. And hopefully I'll meet you one of these days when I'm through Teton Valley.
Yeah, well, I'm really flattered that you asked me to be part of it. And yeah, it definitely would be awesome to connect in person sometime. So
Yep.
thanks for inviting me to do this.
Yeah, well, keep up the good work.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Ed again. Thanks so much for listening to the podcast, and thanks for listening to that particular episode. I hope you enjoyed it. Before you go, I've got 3 quick things. Number 1, if you like the podcast, please do me a huge favor. Either pass it along to a friend who may be interested, share it on your social media, and or go to iTunes and give it a 5-star review. All those things would mean a lot to me, and they would really help to spread the word about the podcast. Number 2, if you've listened to many of these episodes, you know that I love reading and I love talking about books. Every other month, I send out a quick email with a few books that I've recently read and highly recommend. The subjects are varied, but they're pretty much all nonfiction with an emphasis on history, biographies, adventure narratives, and topics related to the American West. There are no sales pitches for ranches, no spam, no other kind of nonsense, just books. So if you'd like to sign up for the list, head to Mountain and Prairie/reading, or just go to Mountain and Prairie and there's a massive tab at the top that says book recommendations. Click on it. There are a ton of good books that I've read. Some of the old email lists are on there. You can go crazy. There are a lot of books. And finally, if you know anyone I should interview for the podcast, please don't hesitate to reach out and let me know. All my contact info is at mountainandprairie.com, and I'm on all the social media stuff, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, blah, blah, blah. So feel free to reach out. I'd love to have some recommendations and suggestions of interesting people I should meet. All right, that's it. Thanks for listening. Talk to you soon.